Hey guys, thank you all so much for joining us. This is our last panel of the day. This is kind of inside the development process. We're going to break that down even further, because that's already kind of a big question, and talk specifically about level design. Although we do have two of our panelists from studios that don't do traditional level design in the same way that Bioware Edmonton does. So we'll get several different kind of organizational structures on designing for games. I'm Jessica Merison. I'm the community manager. We've been doing this all weekend. The schedule doesn't change, so come back this time tomorrow and you may see a completely different panel if I'm that exhausted, but hopefully not, but you should still come anyway. So I'm going to let everyone kind of introduce themselves, although I am very proud that I accidentally organized this by studio. This is Bioware Social, which is in Sacramento and San Francisco. This is Mythic, which is in Fairfax, Virginia. And this is Bioware Edmonton, which also has Virtual Love from Montreal, but no one from Montreal is today. So yeah, could you just kind of go across the table and tell us your name, what you do at Bioware, and how long you've been with us?
So Jefferson Valadares, executive producer for Bioware Social. As I said, like Bioware 2 studios, Bioware San Francisco and Bioware Sacramento, working on games for new platforms. I've been with Bioware for 8 months.
I'm Peter Lippman. I'm the art director at Bioware Mythic. I've been at Bioware / Mythic for about 9.5 years. Been in the industry about 12, and I'm the art director. I think I said that already, which means I do wear a lot of different hats, all in the sphere of art and like development direction, that sort of thing.
I'm Michael Gamble. I'm a producer on the Mass franchise, which covers the HD games as well as DLC. I've been with Bioware for over 3 years, and yeah, producer just also many hats, massive many hat person.
Rick Knowles. I'm the lead level designer for the Mass Effect franchise. I've been with Bioware for 4 years now, actually just 4 years. More or less on that, my job is wrangling in all the content, making sure that everything coming from all the departments makes it into level. So.
I'm Nelson Housen. I'm the lead GUI artist, or graphics, UI kind of stuff. And I make all the kind of like inventory, journal, heads-up display graphics in the game that, like if you see like a, with power or something like that, I've probably designed it. I've worked on all the 3 Mass Effects, so yeah, all Mass Effects.
Yeah. I'm Matt Rhodes. I'm a senior concept artist, and yeah, so I draw the pictures that frustrate all the people that have to build them. And I've been with Bioware for about 8 years.
Awesome. So I think let's start out with Bioware Edmonton, Montreal. So those are obviously Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and our most recent title is Mass Effect 3. Mike, as kind of the producer, wears many hats. Can you give us kind of a brief overview about, so we decide we're going to make a game, and we decide what the game is going to be about, and we decide the premise, and maybe we split some of the work, and we're getting to the point where we want to start talking about levels and writing them and designing them. What does the process look like from there?
Well, obviously, since we have a large number of disciplines within the studio, each discipline has its slightly different way on how they do initial prototyping of missions and how they kind of carry it through. Obviously, since we have connections between these many disciplines, they have to work very closely with each other. But it traditionally, from what we see, is that things will start with kind of the writing team, the narrative creative aspect of it. So. Once we understand what we want to do, it's just a matter of basically taking the overall story arc, the story we want to tell, and breaking those into more, discernible chunks. And each of those chunks, they can be represented as either a mission or a extended story sequence, or even an entire, segment of the game, like a chapter. However you want to break it down. The writers are usually responsible for putting together something that we call an execution document, and that document kind of gives a high level narrative beat. What the purpose of that is narratively in the game, and what it brings to it. We basically use that as kind of the initial blueprint. All the while, you've got all the other groups kind of doing their prototype phases. So you've got the character guys, the character artists, and the concept guys, doing their initial stuff for what they need to do to fill out the game world. You have the cinematic designers, the cinematic animators starting to get an understanding of how to use the tools and how to work within their spheres. And of course, level art and level design as well are kicking off at that point. I can let Rick talk about that in a bit. But then after the execution document is kind of defined for that narrative space, then the writer, the level designer, the cinematic designer, all the people that kind of move together to make that cohesive experience, they all have to get on the same page, and they basically bring each mission through a number of phases. We, without getting too detailed, we kind of call them narrative playable, white box, orange box, and what those do are basic milestones for us in which you say, okay, at a narrative playable phase, we want to basically define what a level is narratively, the pacing and spacing for it, get the very high level narrative beats, and then we basically take it from there to white box and orange box. And so every discipline has a slightly different take on it. I know levels has a huge impact on the early stages as well as in the finishing stages. So, Rick, do you have much to add there?
Yes, we do. Yeah, like when it comes down to it, one of the benefits of Bioware is very, I guess, sharing oriented on that. Like, we encourage everyone to sort of contribute at every stage of the process as much as possible. Just found from history, like, the more attachment that people have to the content, obviously the better, because they're more passionate, they're more enthusiastic about trying to make that as good as it can be. So, like, even at the execution doc, we pretty much have all 9 departments that represented in some shape or form, and that's sort of feeding in. It's primarily design driven. At Bioware, we have 4 disciplines under the design umbrella. We have level design, writing, cinematic design, and we also have gameplay. So we sort of come up with that core concept on that and try to bring it through. And what's understated is just how long that process takes. For Mass 3, typically for any level, we were usually in that writing document phase and prototypes and that for about 2 months per level. Not every design comes through from the beginning. It takes a lot of work, a lot of iteration actually, and we blow up a lot of our babies pretty fast, and that's just to make sure that, like, it has to, like, we're building a huge game, and the level could be really good, and then you start looking at it with other levels, and it's not so good. It has to make sense, and especially with Mass 3, we were trying to tie up everything, so it really did all have to kind of work together. So there was a lot of missions that just got cut, right from the beginning, or refactored. I personally worked on the Miranda mission, and when it began, I think we were building Auschwitz in space, and it completely changed by the end, because it just didn't make any sense.
The biggest change that I saw with like, the Legion mission, when you're inside, that was originally completely different than the way it turned out. So that's just a matter of how the iteration process goes.
And so a lot of that we could catch at the execution doc, and we have a panel of people that will review those documents, sort of go over it, give their feedback, and most times blow it up. It's really cheap. Paper doesn't cost that much. Well, it's digital, so it costs almost nothing, just time. Narrative playables are probably our biggest sort of proving ground. Like, it is the pacing and spacing, but it really is a matter of trying to take something from paper and put it in front of somebody, because it makes a huge difference, like, walking around, playing with it. And it's just like pop-up characters, and like everyone just falls down really quick, and pop-ups for like text beats and stuff like that. But it makes a huge difference to actually sit down and play through it, so that way you can actually make your cuts when it's cheap. As Mike was alluding to, like, the animation department is probably one of our biggest costs. Like, cinematic, everything that Parrish Lay does, it's hugely expensive, because the amount of time that it takes for him to properly develop that content and then bring it through, you have to get it right. And if you change your mind sort of 6 months down the road, it's really expensive. And like, there is content that we threw, but we minimized a lot more in Mass 3 than we did over in Mass 2, just by introducing these steps, sort of adhering to them. So.
And actually just kind of bringing up the point of sim design, I'm interested from Jefferson, Peter, from your perspective, how is that a challenge that you guys face? Is it different? In Jefferson Studio, probably a lot of our fans will most know the studio's work from like Dragon Age Legends, the Facebook game, and things like that. Obviously, there is not a lot of cinematic design involved. So, how is the level design and the overall game development process different from some of our HD titles?
Well, I mean, the main difference, like I said, is just the cost. I mean, we don't have. I mean, also based on the nature. I'll just give like for the example of Dragon Age Legends, a Facebook game on the browser. Most people tend to play with their sound off. So just because they're at workplace or whatever. So from that point of view, I don't say yeah, we don't do like so from that point of view, like it's not very cost effective to have tons of like voiceover material because it's probably going to be wasted on like the actual reality of people playing the game. So we take that into account when we're making a game, and the music and all the other things as well. So and then so that affects how we do it. So we still think about the way we actually think about these levels. We still have levels and content. We may call them missions or something different, like depending on the game. But we usually try to think of the game in terms of what's the initial game like. So for somebody who just came to the game, what the game's like, and how can we get missions that will get the player to understand what the game is, what the narrative is, etc. And we also need missions which are more like, okay, if somebody has been playing this game for 2 months, because our games are more designed for people to play over long periods of time rather than sit down, lock yourself in a room and play for like the whole weekend and you're done. So we need to think of, if somebody comes back to this game 2 months from now, like what kind of mission would they want to play? Is this more like a high-level tactical thing, or is it more like a group type of battle, etc. So we take that into account when we're designing the missions, and we design them differently based on life cycle of the player within the game. But it's actually pretty different the way we think about it. We are blessed that they end up being a lot cheaper to do, so we do more of them, and we also throw a lot of them out, like when we're doing testing. But at least we can turn them around quicker, which we just get more iteration time, which is great.
I've had in my career, I've worked on. I actually started out in level design on shooters, first-person shooters. So I kind of started there in single-player games, and then went to these like Mythic is known for having done a lot of MMOs like Dark Age of Camelot and Warhammer. And so it's interesting to see the difference in scale when you work on a level that's designed for a single person running through it, or a couple people in multiplayer, versus an MMO level design, which is you have to worry about what people are going to do when you get hundreds of people converging on a single space. But fundamentally, the approach is probably really similar to what they were just describing, where you sort of lay out where you want people to go to. There's a lot of psychology involved with it. You start early, kind of like in a white box, an orange box, whatever you want to call it. Basically build early. Put your major location marks down where you want someone to go, and then you build your content around those major core areas. As an artist, I always like to say that, like you look at the Earth and you build this geography first, and then man carves out of it. So we kind of used to take that approach where you would kind of build this interesting topography and then go, yeah, someone would really like to walk over there. And then we would kind of place stuff down and figure out how, with our content, to kind of dangle this carrot along to make you navigate through the world. And we try to take you through it in a sort of cinematic, interesting way. And then you're doing the technical end of worrying what happens when 1,000 people decide that they want to cyber over in the corner, and you got to worry about the server crashing. And so there's these weird dichotomies that happen, not sometimes completely at odds with each other. But yeah.
And Nelson and Matt, can you talk a little bit about the collaborative process that goes into the level design, and where specifically your work comes in? And
yeah, it's so much fun. I forget to use the word iteration, but that is like the golden, beautiful, lovely word. What's really great. Like honestly, the game designers are great at what they do. They understand flow and pacing and combat, and they'll cut just like sweat bullets over getting all of that right. So what we tend to do, particularly on the art side, is really just kind of try to get out of the way, and going through that iterative process and basically building entire levels and almost the entire game out of what equates to cardboard boxes in the early stages, that you don't feel bad just tearing up and starting all over again. You know, you can come in and get the inspiration, like, okay, you guys have, you're in a field with a big cathedral and there's a graveyard or something like that, whatever it ends up being, you know, if you can feel it when it's just a big white cardboard box over here and all that, you know, that you can come in and paint over that and really just like get that working together. It's that cooperation, and it really, what we've been trying to do more and more over time is like get in early at those prototyping stages, start doing early paint overs so that, you know, our work is relevant to them and is actually helping them and yeah, just helping to put their design in context, and it's kind of, I like to think of the art side as trying to help knit the story and the actual physical levels and characters together.
On my side, I find I help level guys with kind of some of the graphic elements and things. So if you see like a company or like a, you know, some sort of graphic that's trying to sell something or just kind of say, hey, there's a store here or something that you need to interact with, I help build those kind of graphics or those companies into the game. And I guess also with design and level, kind of like, you know, where you go to kind of like, you know, get your Spectre mission or like how the kind of GUI reflects that kind of, you know, what you need to do in certain parts, or, you know, where you need to upgrade your stuff, or you know, just, you know, so you can see like, you know, this kind of like swirly kind of like armor thing. It's like, oh, I've got all these armor stuff there. So kind of just kind of that visual.
Yeah, it's one of the most, in the world of graphic design, like for graphic designers doing their thing, pathfinding and signage is just, it's one of the most challenging phases. I mean, even just around this conference center, or most of us probably went through through airports, you know, trying to find out where you need to go, like that's a crazy job, and essentially you're trying to do the same thing.
Where you going to go?
Yeah, no, really, yeah, you know, running through.
Well, the other thing though that definitely comes into play, a lot of times, like, okay, with a title like Mass Effect, we know that it's a game, but we try to make it as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
Like, still though, we're making a game. So you end up with game elements in there, and one of the best things that we get, like, is the GUIs and stuff like that make it feel a lot more immersive, as opposed to just straight up, like, you know, I'm not playing Pong, but really you're playing Pong. You know, it doesn't feel like that. Like, you know, it helps me like abstract that kind of stuff.
Yeah, trying to pull, like, I think more and more we're trying to pull more of the kind of interface into the game, so it's like you're not playing, you know, game in game, but you're kind of like the game that you're playing. It feels more real. It feels like you're interacting with like something that you'd actually interact with in the game, and it feels more like you're that character in a world that exists than like you're in game messing with stuff.
So one of the interesting things about the prototyping phase that you kind of go through early is you're looking at timing. It's one thing that a lot of people don't think about, but like run times to go down a quarter happens. It's something that you have to pay attention to, because it's not really fun to run down a really long hallway. But that's like some of your early designs do that because you think that it's going to be really cool or whatever happens. And then you can very early establish if you study architecture, you'll see that we like to mess with your emotions, where we put you in a tight space when we want you to feel claustrophobic, and then suddenly open it out back up, even if it's still in a white box, you know, boring page. It suddenly is relieving. You'll notice that people always turn to the right for some reason instead of going left, and so you design, you know, ways to send them back around. So as you're kind of prototyping levels, you can see a lot of that stuff right at the beginning. It's amazing what you can find.
That's really, so, okay, so you mentioned like psychology kind of as well as architecture. What are some other like non-game dev disciplines or aesthetics or professions that you kind of draw upon? I know it feels very like, you know, puzzle-like or like you're a civil planner sometimes, or what other kind of disciplines that we might be more familiar with, because to be frankly honest, it's a very mind-boggling process. I can't really wrap my mind around it.
I mean,
Don't tell me it's just architecture and psychology.
does provide two big ones, but I don't know.
Logic. It's logic, right? Like, one of the core things that, like, okay, if I'm looking to hire a level designer, or like, one of the biggest things that we need is somebody who has a really strong grasp of logic, because, again, it is a big tangled piece of mess. Like, like somebody coming in trying to understand what you've done, it's crazy, right? Like, you take a look what Chris did with the endgame stuff, right? Like, it's this huge mess, and if you can't keep it together in your head, like, you need really strong analytical, logical skills.
Yeah, another skill I think we use, which it's kind of from the other side, is we do a lot of testing. I think we all do a lot of testing before we release our content. So that means either like humans that we pay for and humans that we don't pay for.
No animals.
No animals.
We just get them by the crate.
So either somebody in our teams that is kind of playing through and giving us comments, or somebody like like a small group of friends that we get access to things and see what they think, or just like getting a lot of people to play and then looking at the metrics, like how many people, like what's the time people take to finish this particular thing, what's the progression, are they getting stuck on this particular area, are they getting stuck on this particular level, and using these things to iterate. So none of these things are necessarily architecture.
I thought of another one, which is finance. I would use this example that like the original Halo, you ran through the same like Vista 17 times in the same quarter over and over, and they made you backtrack back and forth because they were probably thinking about their budget. And they thought, wow, we can reuse the same piece of content over and over and over and over again. But through clever level design, it felt fresh every time because there was different enemies and different stuff flying around, and there's flying things coming across the same bridge that you ran across. And like, yes, it's a cheap trick, but it works. That's part of the other side of it is like we're making a really cool game. Then as you're making your level design, that's another thing. Those long quarters, they cost a lot of money if you're having to model out every little piece. So you're thinking about how you can be cost conscious as you're making certain pieces, and you go, well, we really need this awesome Vista, and you put the time there because you think it's worth it. So you're doing, you always have that in the back of your head, like how can I do this more efficiently? How can I get it to the fans faster and make more of it?
Yeah, like you're a magician. Like it's all smoke and mirrors. Like as long as you think it's doing this, it's doing that. Like that's all that matters, right? Like one of the most notorious problems to deal with is dynamic lights in games. They're expensive as hell. They're the pain in the ass to implement. But if you can actually do it with like say fog planes, like as far as the people playing, great. It looks the same. And one's like so much cheaper. It's just like who cares? Like as long as you thought it was that.
And you really only need to build what the player is seeing, right? So if you go on any movie set, they don't recreate the attack of Pearl Harbor in the entire ocean. They basically have a soundstage and they do it, right? So when we have a scene in which Shepard's talking to Garrison in a certain area of a club or the Citadel or wherever, sometimes to make that scene perform well and actually work the way we want to, we kind of build like a soundstage basically in the level. And then the cinematic guys just place the actors, and then they basically choreograph the scene that way. We don't always need to build these amazing, new areas and locales just for a couple scenes. So that's another way we really, watch what we build so that we can actually get it out quicker.
I think I may be the only person. Someone else raise their hand if you've experienced this, so I don't feel like crazy or alone or stupid. But until very, very recently, I used to think that stuff actually was there, and I just couldn't access it. Like that. Okay, well, if I bugged the game, maybe I could see what was behind that door. Someone please raise their hand and tell me that you've experienced that. Okay, good. It's all of us. Everyone else who didn't raise their hand, you were just shy. It's heartening to know that is not true, that there is nothing behind that door, and I was small until the end of the ages.
It isn't.
It is true. I'm writing it down.
No, but this is why, our quality assurance team is, we depend on them so much, and that because, we build the initial shell of what we want the player to experience, and then they go through it so many times to try to find all those holes, and then a lot of times you're just sticking something there in that hole so that it looks like there was something there, but it's just a cheap solution and it makes it still feel hugely immersive. But
we should rename this panel to
destruction of
designing inside the development process, smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. We're ruining your charm.
Well, but it's a good point. I would say the majority of level design is psychology. It's just you are manipulating people to do what you want them to do. that's why it becomes a bit more of a pain in the ass when doing something like, where you have free open reign, like open world on that type of content.
And I think one of the more the interesting thing that happens is you're designing this whole psychology, and you think you're all smart.